email to make sure that I'm not missing any readers, but it doesn't look like I am. So I will, without further ado, let Kathryn take it away.
All right. Hi, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our bi-monthly Bridge Book Club. My name is Kathryn Dougal. I am the Development and Engagement Specialist here at Bridge, Michigan. Today, we'll be discussing The Dockporter by Dave McVeigh and Jim Bolone. And today's event is hosted by Bridge, Michigan. I'm also joined today by my colleagues, Amber Delind and Josiah Foster. Amber will be moderating our discussion today. If you're not familiar with Bridge, Bridge Michigan is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and your community. You can subscribe for free at bridgemi.com. We also want to thank our current Bridge Club members, people who have donated to Bridge over the last year. For those of you who are Bridge Club members, you get a number of free benefits, including a free ebook copy of the Bridge Book Club selection. You can become a member today by visiting the link that Amber is going to drop into the chat. We're so lucky today to be joined by the authors, Dave and Jim, and I'm going to give a full bio of each of them momentarily, but we're really excited that they'll be joining us. The schedule for today's discussion is that after we do those intros, Amber will lead a discussion with Dave and Jim about the book for about 40 minutes. And after that, we're going to allow some reader questions. So at any time during this chat, if you want to drop your questions into the chat, we'll be taking those at the end. And we'll be promptly recording or posting this recording after this discussion on our website at bridgemi.com. So feel free to pop in your questions and let's introduce our guests. So first today we have Dave McVeigh. Dave is an experienced writer and director and creative director who has worked with studios like Disney, Fox, and Universal Studios and brands like Nike, PayPal, and Ford. He's also an award-winning TV producer. He spent his summers on Mackinac Island as a dockporter, hence the story. And he now lives in Cebu, Philippines with his wife and daughter. And this is his first novel. We're also joined today by Jim Bolone. Jim was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, where he attended public school and eventually Wayne State University, where he earned his BA in English. Currently, he teaches English in White House, Ohio. Throughout his life, he has been a drummer, dockporter, bouncer, and bartender. Many things. He shares his home in Toledo, Ohio, with his wife and 3 kids. Thank you both for joining us today. And now I will send it over to Amber to get us started.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. And Jim and Dave, thank you so very much for being willing to join us from very different parts of the world and willing to share sort of your experience as authors of this book that many of our readers, myself included, really enjoyed. So thank you for being here and being willing to chat with us a little bit about The Dockporter.
Thanks, Amber.
Thanks for the invite.
We're happy to have you. So this is, as Kathryn said, one of our bi-monthly Bridge Book Club events, and it was one of our most popular selections to date. Readers were very excited to hear and feel a little bit of sort of that summer magic on Mackinac Island. So I'm curious, just to get us started, would you tell us a little bit about yourselves and essentially why you chose to write The Dockporter?
Jim, do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first?
After you, my dear Alphonse.
All right, then I'll go first. Well, I mean, the intro hit on it a little bit. I grew up in Michigan. I was born and raised and grew up in Milford, went to the University of Michigan, spent my summers on Mackinac Island, and I was a dockporter carrying luggage on the island for many, many summers, which is where I met Jim, who's right over there, or maybe he's right over there. And, you know, we became great friends. And I always felt, and then after that, I moved to Los Angeles and got involved in the movie and TV business. But I always felt like it was an incredible setting for a film. And it was kind of like a dream. So it really started out as a movie script originally. And, but, you know, it's very difficult to get a movie made. It's quite expensive and kind of sat on the shelf for a long, long time. And it was just like one of those dreams that, you know, I sort of kept in the back of my head, but kind of had to move on with life because it's rough. And then especially when I moved to the Philippines, the idea of making a movie on Mackinac was not particularly practical. But somewhere along the line, actually during COVID, was when I started to dust off the script and say, you know what, this has to live. Like, so much thought and time went into it. And it was such a great era that Jim and I both experienced as, as young guys. There's got to be another way. And then I was like, oh, duh. Just make it into a novel. Like, the fact that I didn't think about that about 10 years earlier is practically embarrassing. Right about that very same time, Jim, who I hadn't talked to in a long, long time, reaches out. He knows I'm in the Philippines. So it's like, it was completely weird, actually, to hear from him after so long. And we just started chatting. And one of the things he said was, yeah, we should work on something together, because I knew he was a writer. And I was like, he's like, do you have anything? And I'm like, actually, as a matter of fact, I do. I want to make this Dockporter script into a novel. And I very much want to work with a partner, because I like collaborating. And and it was like unbelievable. It just like came together in a way that was meant to be. I mean, it sounds very, very corny, but I mean, the fact that I hadn't heard from him so long, and then all of a sudden, so that, that's sort of a little bit of the backstory. And then Jim, you can pick it up from there. But the next step was crafting it into a novel and collaborating in different time zones. So there's a lot to this story. This isn't your average writing a book story, that's for sure. Jim, talk.
Well, I was going to tell him that Dave had conditions, and one of the conditions was that I had to send him a case of fudge in order to collaborate with him. So I made that
melted by the time I got here.
No, real quick, I was the youngest of 7 kids in Detroit. Big family. My father was a saxophone player. That's how he raised us, playing in a band, a big band. My mother was an artist. I was kind of I guess a crazy wild kid. I loved reading comic books. And we would argue comics at my buddy's house and smoke cigarettes. And I was a TV kid. So basically I was an imaginative soul. My parents helped fuel that. Fast forward pre-COVID, things were getting really strange in school and in life. This is a crazy story. I'll make it quick. I went to sleep one night, and I was thinking of, using some of the information from this piece for a short story. And I just needed to talk to Dave. I felt the urge to contact him. And it was an emotionally draining and emotionally strange period at pre-COVID. Didn't know what to expect, what was happening. And of course, lo and behold, the next day, we touched base. And when we decided to work together on this story, I was beyond excited. I knew that I had something to pull me through, something to work on with someone who I genuinely have an affinity toward and love. And I'd been working on short stories, which I love. I love solitary writing, but it gets lonely at times. Working with Dave is a treat. He's very clever. He understands. He's taught me a lot. And I'm very grateful for that. So that's how it began. And as I sit here, I'm still very, very grateful that I'm working with Dave. I love it.
Likewise.
Thank you.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say, and we touched on this a bit, but Jim and I work together. I mean, the reason we know each other is we were both Dockporters on Mackinac Island. So, and that was like back in the 80s. So, we'll get into this, I'm sure, in more detail, but this concept of being able to reunite and over, a story that was essentially based on, it was a little bit more based on my own personal life on the island, based loosely, but a big part of that, the key part of the book was those summers on the docks, and Jim was a huge part of that. Like, he was a mentor. He's a little bit older than I am, and he was a legendary character at that time. So, to be able to like work together on something that personal that much later in life and remembering all the details is, it's like brought it all back, and it's still here, That was I just wanted to touch on that, but I don't want to, I know you have another question teed up.
Well, I think it actually leads right into it. So, that sounds, what a special sort of way for the two of you to connect. I'm curious, this has just been such a strange time for all of us. And I can't imagine what the process must be like to sort of release a novel in the midst of sort of COVID and all of this. Can you tell us a little bit more about the experience of sort of releasing a book in the midst of the pandemic and how it all came to be?
I will start. First of all, it was arduous, it was difficult, but it was painful at times, but put all those things together. And again, Dave and I working together, it was magical. I believe, and I'm going to try to speak for Dave on this, that it was a reducer of anxiety and a reducer of negativity. We worked well together. We had fun doing this. And yeah, there were times where it was painstaking, but still it was something to look forward to on a daily basis. Now, Dave was at times 13 hours away, and we had to coordinate our work together. But even then, that was worth it. And so I must also say, with Dave's expertise, being able to, the whole idea of self-publishing it's a huge undertaking. But when you're working with someone like Dave, who's very acclimated to processes and producing, coordinating, projects, it just, for me, with all of his research, all of his diligence, it was easier. He really laid out the red carpet from all of his effort, all of his work, and all of his diligence. So with that, and it's easy for me to say that it was a welcome, wonderful, carefree opportunity. It was really none of that. It was lots of work, at times chaos, but Dave made it pleasurable and very understanding and clear for me. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think that I will say that I'll talk a little bit about the self-publishing part of it, which, I had to learn about. But again, like Jim said, my background is in video production, film, marketing. Like, I do know how to learn things really quickly. And I was fascinated with the concept of self-publishing anyway. And we went through the Amazon route. And there's the other thing that's really cool is that there's so much information about it. Authors are very generous people, and there's you go on YouTube and you search up self-publishing, and there's so much information. There's so many people that want to share their knowledge, and I just binged on all of it and made a plan based on everything that I could find. And the one aspect that was a lot of fun was that we built a Facebook page. We built a website, and then we built a Facebook page. And the Facebook page, as it started in the beginning, was just all of our old friends from the old days, because the Mackinac community stays tight, like really tight. And so all the people that we hung out with back then are still our friends. So it was easy to build this core of fans right off the bat, because they're like, Jim and Dave are writing a book about Dockporters. Like, all you had to do was say the title, and they would just be sold. And so it started to grow. The community started to grow while we were writing the book. So we were actually able to bounce ideas off people and kind of keep this. They were part of the process in some ways. And then right about that same time, which was last summer, we just decided we're all going to meet on Mackinac, because that's when the vaccines finally came. And it was like, okay, people are starting to travel now. It's there was a little dip, and then it got crazy again. But there was a little, right after the post-vaccines, it seemed like Michigan kind of eased up, and there was a little window. And so we planned this book signing event on the island at the Island Bookstore, and all of the people from the old days came. So it was exactly like the book. It was exactly like the final chapter of the book, where and all of a sudden we had this complete love fest, and we're seeing all these old pals we hadn't seen in forever. And they all came to support us at the book signing. So for independent authors, first-time authors who didn't really, were navigating the whole self-publishing world, I would say that we definitely scored a pretty amazing experience, and memorable beyond belief. I think a lot of it just had to do with the subject matter, because people are so fond of that island and all that stuff. But the fact that we were able to actually gather a tribe while we were writing it, and then have them all show up, for a book signing, was pretty amazing. I would say one of the coolest moments of my life, I have to say. So it was epic. And you can imagine that weekend.
I can't. I was just going to ask, so where did you end up? The horn, pink pony?
Oh, God. Yes, and yes.
Yes, all that and more.
But we're all old. We did a road jam, which is like the traditional Dockporter ride around the island, but it was like everybody was like old and beat up, and people were crashing, and we're like, oh well, it was pretty hilarious. There's some great pictures actually if you go on the Facebook group. The Dockporter, a Mackinac novel is the group that we have, and there's a lot of pictures from that weekend, and it was humorous because these are a bunch of like funny people to begin with, and a lot of us hadn't seen each other in a long time, and oh man, I haven't laughed that hard. And talk about the perfect time to have like some real laughs, right in the middle of all this complete darkness.
No kidding. Amazing. Oh man, I'm so thrilled to hear that reunion scene was so similar. That's fantastic.
It was exactly like the book. I mean, it was we couldn't. I mean, we were all just like each other going, this is what's happening right now.
I couldn't find Erin. I was looking for Erin. I couldn't find her.
It was missing. It was an Irish fiddle player.
There was no fiddle playing. That's a bummer.
Probably a good thing.
Well, my next question reads sort of right into sort of that experience and that feeling. So Bridge is a statewide publication, and our book club chooses books that have a connection to Michigan. As you might imagine, a lot of our readers, even some are talking about their experiences in the chat right now, have really meaningful memories on Mackinac Island. I'd be curious to know a little bit about the reader reaction you've received so far, especially from Michigan residents.
Sure. I mean, yeah, people were moved. I mean, honestly, I think the people, again, in some ways, I think that we were smart. We didn't plan it to be this smart, but we ended up seeming smart by writing it for the people that we know. It was like really like if we like sell 15 copies to like this group right here, this will have been a raging success. It was written in a very personal way for the type of people that actually have spent summers on the island, have worked on the island. And I think the more personal it got, the more it resonated, even for people that didn't know the island. They're like, this feels real. And that was one piece of feedback we received a lot, which is they could feel it. They're like, the way you describe like a bungee cord attaching, it's just such a weird thing, those little details. But I think that the reunion weekend and the way that the Facebook group and the reviews, if you look at the reviews on Amazon, that's to me, like, I get overwhelmed sometimes when I read them because they're mostly, you can just tell they're people from Michigan generally. And they're just like, this captures exactly how it felt. I remember it's my favorite place. And, just people would write in the reviews, not just about the story, but the feelings of the story and the feelings and how it relates to Mackinac and their own personal memories and stuff like that. So I think it touched a lot of people and way beyond what we were trying, like eventually it gets out of your own hands and it becomes something else to other people. But it's been incredible. Jim?
Yeah, excuse me. Since this all began, we really had a resounding, this kind of a crescendo of growth with all of our friends and people that have been associated with the island and Dockporters. And since the book's release, I look at the reviews on Amazon, and I look at Goodreads, and there's this it's like a tapestry of reactions, and many of them are, of course, people that have an affinity toward the island, and it's a really gratifying. It's really gratifying to see these things and to read these words, because Dave and I set out to write a story for our friends and family. We wanted to have fun with this, and we really did, and we had a good time with it. But once we released it and we had such a reaction, it was startling and exciting. I will say this: we were on the island our first day for the reunion, and a friend of mine from Georgia, he has stage 4 cancer in his lungs and in his brain. He drove from Georgia to Mackinac City to meet us on the island. And when I was in Marquette Park and I turned and saw him approaching me, I couldn't believe it. He came up for that. And it wasn't necessarily just for the book. It's something that Dave in his heart and soul created a long time ago, which was a really magical story. And we converted it into a novel, and people read it, but it generated something in their hearts and souls about the island. It awakened something. It awakened a lot of things in people in their lives. And Kenny's visit to the island was just an example of that fervor, that love. And that's the kind of thing that changes me. It changes many of us, but definitely me. So beautiful.
That's really special. Thank you for sharing both of your stories. I'm curious, I know this is a work of fiction, this is a novel, but I've seen some similar questions in the chat already. So I just want to make sure that I ask this question. Are there any people or themes in this book that are inspired by true events?
What do you think? Yeah, definitely. I mean, it wouldn't have been written if you know, I mean, you're talking to two guys that were dockporters in 1989. You know, it doesn't take you can sort of extrapolate out from that. I personally had a cottage on the island. I had a group of friends that were very much like, you know, what you do. I mean, I think it's what every writer does, is they sort of take, you know, composites of people that they know, and, you know, you never want to be too on the nose, but there's some of it's pretty on the nose, actually, because we kind of, to be honest with you, we didn't think it was going to be as popular as it is. I'm not kidding. I knew that it was a regional, when I was thinking about regional fiction, that was like a concept I had in my head. And I told Jim about this in the very beginning. I'm like, if we just focus in on like people on Mackinac, you know, at least 300 people will buy it, you know, but, you know, I never thought about it big, you know, actually, and it sold way more than we expected. But the answer is, yeah, there's a lot of real Mackinac in that book, and the people that know where it is, but I'm not telling. You know, he's gotta like, I would say it's like I said before, composited versions of the best and craziest and most interesting of everybody. And but it wasn't difficult, because it's that island, especially for when you live there. You know, you stay after the last boat for a couple months, a year, or whatever, a long time. You start to realize that it's just an absolutely fascinating place, and the people that love that island are different. They're not normal people, myself included, and definitely not Jim. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reality in there, and there's a lot of like, you know, everything gets a little more enhanced and a little crazier, or more romantic, or more whatever, you know, like fictionalized. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I think so.
Yeah.
Jim, did you have anything you wanted to add before?
I think Dave nailed it. It was, you know, there's an amalgam of all the characters, all the people we knew, and it's kind of cool to see. I call it, it's kind of like a Frankensteining of people, so of characters.
It was funny because the last pass, do not to interrupt you, but the very last pass of the book, when we were like already into, like, had done a couple of pretty like heavy like line edits, I was like, we got to do one last pass and like change some of these names. And, you know, all of a sudden I started to get paranoid at the very end that some of it was a little too close. So we went back and kind of, you know, mixed things around just in case. But there was never anything in there that's like incriminating or anything like that. It was always it's a total postcard to Mackinac, but you know, you never know how people are going to react to things.
Sure. All right. So I have a couple of questions. Just one of the things we hear from our readers a lot when we do these book club events is that they really love to hear a little bit about sort of the process and sort of how a book is created, because I know that's certainly something I don't know a lot about, and I'm very fascinated by it as an avid reader. So one question I was curious about is sort of the structure that you chose for the book, sort of having an alternation between first and third person and having two different time periods. Did you kind of always know that's where you were headed, or how did you come up with that idea of a way to sort of illustrate sort of some of the concepts that you were laying out in the book?
I'm gonna go ahead, Jim.
Oh no, real quick. I'm gonna actually segue into Dave. we did take the script and we decided to novelize it, and then came up with the idea of, we have this narrative distance, and I think starting out in third person, there's that extra distance, which gives the reader an idea, maybe in terms of exposition, maybe in terms of feeling the piece. And then we created a threshold into first, which narrows the narrative distance. And at once, as he's now crossing that threshold, we are as writers from third to first, and Jack's, conversing with the passenger in the ferry boat. Now we've actually worked to narrow that distance, not only with Jack and the character, but also the reader. And that's kind of an interesting thing that we did. I'm not so sure we did it consciously, but I think it happened naturally in terms of, and a lot of it boils down to distance. And we're both, I've said this time and time again with people, we are a combination. I think we're more planners than we are pansters. I think that we tend to love, creating our beat sheets and to a degree an outline, but then along the way, we're fanatical about revision and, last moment changes. Dave?
Yeah, that's an English teacher that you just heard from. In case that wasn't obvious.
Thanks.
I learned a lot from Jim. He knows all these terms. I think that there's a couple of things, because it was like that. It was that way in the script. And I do think that there was something I was always a little bit intrigued with the sort of like sentimental journey concept. It's not exactly the most original thing in the world, but like I also always loved Princess Bride, because, I love how Princess Bride is a story that's told to a little kid. And then once in a while you break into the story and like, wait. I remember the kid would be like, they're going to kiss, or whatever. Like he was always interrupting the story. It's like, you want to hear this or not? And I just completely ripped that idea off. But I love the idea of a story being told on one boat ride across. I think that's a cool structure. And then I also felt, and we felt, and it got reinforced when we started working together, but the idea of a first person narrator is fun because, Jack's a unique guy, and I like being able to really get inside a character's head and understand what he's thinking or she's thinking. And, I think it just makes it it opens up a lot of opportunities for thoughts and insights and observations and things like that. And I do think that's kind of like my style in general. I sort of an absurdist. The world seems totally ridiculous to me, like in a good way. And I think that character has a lot of that too, which is just, observing things. And that island is so rich for that because it's so full of characters and visuals. So having it be in first person is allowed for a lot more of that. So I think that's probably why. And then, yeah, and to Jim's point, the structuring part is a lot of that comes from screenwriting. Where it's always extremely, because you're dealing with a very lean story writing style, which I don't prefer, but I'd written a lot of scripts, and it's extremely, it just has to be super lean, and because of that, you have to have a really strong outline. And I think I just have that ingrained in my head that you have to have a strong outline to stay on track, and I think it helped us a lot. And it's helping us for the next book too. We're already like deep into it. And it's all, very, very outlined. And the cool thing about a great outline is you can always toss it out, but at least you have a roadmap of where you're supposed to go. And I prefer to work that way. Some of that also comes from directing, because I've done a lot of live action directing. You don't go on a set without, like really, like storyboards and various, because you just can get lost and it's very expensive. So I think I'm a bit of strangely enough, because I'm not like I'm kind of a little on the wild side, but I definitely am a planner when it comes down to projects and things, creative things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's really helpful to sort of understand how these things come together. One of the themes of the book, of course, is sort of this sort of conflict between tradition and modernity or progress. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of your thoughts on that theme and what message you were hoping that readers would take away?
Yeah, you want me to start? Yeah, it seems to be a recurring theme throughout life. I think it's strange because in families and in circles, we're always a bit apprehensive with change. When I was a young boy and computers were coming out, people were worried. You know, there's always this apprehension, this anxiety about newness, but there's also a beauty in tradition. I think that when we look at the novel, the new, you know, the avant-garde, we tend to, we do question, because we have the yesterdays to comfort us, because hindsight is always 20/20, and it's always been there. With this particular story, there is this imminent fear, and against this idea of you know, decades long, you know, tradition or traditions, and I believe that is kind of universal, and I do believe that's what has helped make the story impactful, and maybe in a sense universal. This idea, this chasm between yesterday and if not today and tomorrow. We see it this day and age with young people, and no, all people, not just young, all ages, with you know, smartphones, etc. And how many people are making the claim, would love to go back to the way things were. And then we have other people that are definitely champions and proponents of technology, which is fantastic. But it does stir the pot. It creates an arguable set of circumstances. And I believe that this story does fuels those kinds of thoughts. And you know, who knows what the future holds for the island and for other places that are dear to us. But I think
I think there's a moment in the book where Jack even says that the place is precious, you know, and I think that I feel that way. It's a precious little piece of glass or something. It just so, you could just blow on it and it could be gone. And I think that Jack recognizes that. I felt that way when I was young, even when I was really too young to like be thinking like profound thoughts. I was always like, this has to stay this way. Like, you know, the nightmare of cars. Like, I used to literally have nightmares about cars being on the island. And that's just a crazy thing for a kid to have a nightmare about, but it just terrified me. It was like a machine. It was like that beat of construction, and it just felt like this place cannot handle that. It cannot ever happen. And so to me, as like the ultimate nightmare was growing up there, was that there would be just everything that is going to happen in the book, you know, that there would be construction and cars. I mean, there's obviously been changes up on the island, and houses have been built and things like that. Obviously, you know, there's a lot more construction there now than there was in, like, say, 1720. So things have changed, but I think it's like maxed out. And I think there's a lot of people on that island, people that really love the place, that are always in the back of their mind a little apprehensive about what if it changes? What if someone buys the whole thing? Like, anything can happen. And so I think and plus, you know, there's also a thematic element of it too, which is, you know, Jack, like Jim said, like the family stuff and the tradition and the idea of wanting things to like stay the same is pretty powerful. And especially, I mean, the place is a perfect metaphor. The island itself is a metaphor for change. I mean, it couldn't be more on the nose, but I think that's good. You know, we're not trying to get too complicated. Well, I think that's kind of why it's sort of a charming read, is that it's just right there. It's very straightforward, and that island is precious, and that change sometimes is not good, and it definitely is not good there. That's part of the reason people love it so much.
Right. It's constant.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Linda and Lawrence just asked a question in the chat that I actually had on my list. To your knowledge, has there ever been a proposal for something like a casino or a similar, you know, development on the island? Or just curious about whether that was sort of realistic.
It wasn't drawn on for the story, but I definitely did some research and talked to some, you know, good friends, you know, that were like state park people, and it's always lurking. Yes, never anything quite like that, not that on the nose. But I mean, think about it. They built a college on the island. It's now the Mission Point Resort. But I mean, that was like a college. Like
Yeah.
they made a couple of like wrong turns, even in reality. So I think, obviously money is insane what it does, and I think everything is possible, anything is possible. And you can say, oh, 82% of the Mackinac Island is protected state park, but someone comes in with $7 trillion or something, it might be like, who knows? I mean, there's always people pushing in, there's always chains pushing in, and they've done everything they can to try and hold on to. There is a Starbucks on the island now, but there's no like McDonald's, there's like no chains, but it's always, there's a margin, and the thing is about that margin, whereas it starts to break a little bit, then it can just start to slowly creep in. And that was, I think, another thing that's in the book where they talk about, I think, or maybe it's just me in my head, but this idea of like how change can happen so slowly that you don't even recognize it. And then one day you go, what happened to the place? This is more like brutal. And then the idea of coming in with casinos is like obviously pretty like a broad stroke of change, but it can also happen, I think, in small ways. That
well, this is
very
interesting. I mean, what is interesting is, bicycle.
What if it's not interesting, Jim? Is it interesting?
Then it will not be interesting.
Better be interesting.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, e-bikes, electric bikes, this is something that's slowly making its way onto the island. And it's arguable when someone brings their electric bicycle to the island, they can argue that it's pedalable. You can pedal it. And that's how things begin to change subtly. It's either no e-bikes or e-bikes. But
yeah, golf carts. Well, there's a golf cart. There's golf carts on the golf course. Why can't there be golf carts carrying luggage?
Right.
I don't know. And then as everybody's, it's and also the other part about that change aspect is it is very much based on people's perspective. Like my version of what's acceptable, and Jack says this too, which is that, and even gets called out on it by Gordon, which is like, you're fine with change. You were fine with this house that you live in being built, but nothing after that. Pretty convenient, we all have that idea, is like most people's version of what can't change is the stuff after what they have, and that's actually not realistic. But I think Mackinac does have a standard, which is good.
Okay, I see that there are lots of reader questions piling up in the chat, so I would just want to ask a couple final ones that I had written ahead of time, and then we'll turn the page to reader questions. This one is another question about the book's plot itself. One thing that really struck me as a reader is that even the young version of Jack seems really pretty aware of sort of the privilege that he has sort of socioeconomically over some of his fellow Dockporters. Was that important for you to sort of depict that that sort of aspect of the story?
Jim, I'll speak to that a bit.
Okay.
And then you can too. But I want to go first because I want to get all the good ideas out. And
I want to go. I want to go
nothing
first.
left.
I'm going
nothing
first.
else to talk about. You'll be like what Dave just said.
I'm going
first.
first.
Different ways.
Okay, you can go.
I think that, I mean, it's kind of like if you want to have the character have a cottage on the island and lose it and also be a Dockporter, it's sort of some facts inherent in the story. And that's happened, it happened with me. We had a cottage on the island and I was a Dockporter and I was kind of embarrassed by it. But at the same time, it was, something that had gone back in our family ways. And it was a different time. There was a time on the island where like regular people could actually get a place on the island. It wasn't always like the millionaires club, and it kind of is now, but back then it was different. 70s, 60s, 50s, whatever, people, some like ordinary-ish people had cottages. But I think it's interesting. I don't know, it adds something to it, which is Jack is sort of a normal guy. He wants to work. He's not, I don't think he is privileged, certainly compared to like Smitty, who's, not. But I think the other thing I like about it, and I think this is something that I experienced on the island, or maybe I just have an idealized memory of it all, which is fine too, which is that I don't think we were just living there and having fun together. It wasn't, I think that island is definitely is protected in a way by water and by a certain amount of reality. And I think that a lot of those differences that are obviously very important in society aren't as strong there. I do think it is a real community, and there are people that are of all types, and it's tiny. So they're all kind of like together. And I don't know, I think it changes your attitude about those types of things. I do think that the idea of a Dockporter having a cottage on the island is something that is realistic. But yeah, I mean, I remember when working up there where, you know, a lot of my buddies were like living on tiny, like intense, you know, and I was like, we just thought it was funny. And we were like, great, Dave's got a place, you know, mostly it was just good for them. You know, they were just happy. And the one thing about my family is that we were extremely aware that we were fortunate. So our front porch was like just party time. And that was not just my generation, but my parents' generation as well. It was always going. And I think it was partially because we knew, like, this is like, we have to share this. This is kind of like too amazing, and everybody, not everybody's this lucky, and we have to make sure that it's open and a place, a gathering place. Jim?
Yeah, no, I think that I'm thinking about this. You know, Jack is definitely a round character. Jack is a product of his existence, his life, his family. And Dave and I had, you know, multiple discussions on this. Jack, in his own way, has experienced emotional, sensitive hardships. Jack is a thinker. He possesses a degree of empathy and love, and it's all a part of this mosaic of his life. And what's really kind of cool is that though Jack may be a young man of what we'll call privilege, because of his emotional truths and realities, he has insight and he feels for others. And it's within him. He doesn't always recognize it, but it is within him. And that's kind of interesting with Erin. She tends to, as a character, not a foil, but as another character, as a character of strength and poise, she's able to draw some of these things out of from Jack, kind of like a poultice, and it works. But that's why
A what?
Jack,
Like a what?
Poultice.
What's a poultice?
Poultice. I don't want to go into it. Okay, I love it.
You're gonna throw words out like poultice. You gotta tell us what it means.
Yeah, it's something that draws something out. It draws the good or the bad.
Is it an
out.
actual device, or is it like
Yeah, you have to make
emotional-
it. It's like a potion. You know, it's
a potion?
medicinal potion.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's learn a new word. I think we all just learned a new word.
Yeah, okay.
English teacher.
Yeah. No, so but it's in Jack, and it, you know, when you read other stories of characters that possess this innate goodness, I mean, this innate need to help others or to experience those things. It's, you know, we can go way back, St. Francis, we can go back to Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse. I mean, you know, Jack is neither one of those, but he possesses this truth that's in him, and he doesn't have, he's every man. There we go.
Fantastic.
I think it's also not a book that's about that. Another
Right.
way to put it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a lot of books are,
Yeah.
and I think there's a range of stories that are about a lot of things, but I don't think this one is kind of like really about that, which sounds
No.
like a cop out in a way, but it's actually not. It's just, it's about a bunch of other things, but I don't think it's about, you know, we just touch on it enough and,
Yeah.
and
And
acknowledge
that's
it, but make it about what it's about.
That's what I love about the character development, because Jack has depth, and it certainly isn't focusing on Jack and those things, but we can talk about those things. And Jack is complex, and he's definitely not linear or flat, and I love that.
Me too.
Thank you.
Well, the last question that I have for the two of you before I turn to some reader questions actually is reflected from a number of our readers. I'm curious about sort of what respectively each of you are working on now. And when it comes to sort of the next in this novel series, are we going to continue to follow the same characters? Is this a new story altogether? Can you tell us? Inquiring mind wants to know.
Jim, can I roll with it?
You go first, I'll go second.
Okay. It's not about Herman Hesse. Sorry. It's not about Siddhartha, but it touches on, I'm kidding. I'm messing with Jim right now, the English teacher. I have to. That's what we do. So yeah, the prequel, it's a prequel. Okay. So imagine Jack as as a paper boy 10 years earlier, same little smartass. 1979, he's the best paper boy, you know, in his own mind, you know, the perfect job for somebody who's eventually going to become a Dockporter. And it's the summer of Somewhere in Time. So there's all this buzz going on the island. Hollywood's coming, and his mother gets a job as a local, as an assistant wardrobe, because she's really a good seamstress. So she gets a job on the movie, which makes Dad very jealous, because she's kind of a free spirit. And and Dad starts to get paranoid, and there starts to be this concern that maybe Mom is having, I'm giving away too much, but it's hilarious. Maybe Mom is having an affair with Christopher Reeve. Okay, so young Jack decides to sort of become like a pint-sized detective and figure out what's really going on the island. And that's A story, right? The B story is that Jack discovers that there is an unsolved murder on the island that happened, I think, 15 years earlier. And there's a standing reward still, which is $10,000 for anybody who can come up with something that leads to the arrest of this murder, the only murder ever on Mackinac. So he thinks in his head, well, if I can get this reward, he just discovers it randomly in the newspaper because it was like the anniversary or the whatever. It was somehow he just stumbles upon this information. He decides that if he can solve this case, get the money, he can buy a trip for his parents to Egypt, which is someplace they've always wanted to go and they never go because Dad's so busy. And he's like, I saved my parents' marriage. First of all, I have to find out what's going on. Secondly, I have to solve this case so I can get this money so I can buy them a trip to Egypt and everybody will live happily ever after. And meanwhile, so he's still running around with Smitty and Gordon, only they're obviously young. So that's kind of like the sort of plot story of it all, but you can imagine it's Mackinac in 79, summer of Somewhere in Time, I was there and it was pretty crazy. But I think one of the best things about it personally is the title, which is called Somewhere in Crime.
Yeah.
So that's the prequel that we're working on right now. So Jim, how are we working on it?
Yeah, we also have, I think Dave tends to save this last part for me. We're adding just a touch of the mysterious, a touch of, would you say, a little bit of a smidgen of horror, a smidgen.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of like Stephen King, like youngish sort of, it's the island, it's mystery, and then Jim's going to tell a little bit about sort of like the Native American aspect of it.
Yeah,
the island obviously was settled by and discovered by, it has a very, very strong Native American presence to it. And Smitty, one of his best friends, is French, Native American. And that leads into another one of the little storylines that there's a lot going on right here. Don't worry, we'll like shave off the rough edges, but we're giving you like the big picture.
Right. And all it really is, the C story is, if it is in fact a C story, but we're going to have this lingering thing. Yeah. The boys tend to listen to Smitty and sometimes his grandmother's tales of the Wendigo, the shape changer who lurks in the woods on Mackinac Island. And so they don't know whether to believe in it or not, but there are moments where they are led to think that this thing just might be real. So that's something that's going to exist in book 2, and we're excited about that as well. So, and
that connects to his trying to solve this unsolved murder, because some of that is involved in the real locals scene. And then the other, I'm just going to stop. You're just going to have to buy it when it's done. Go the whole thing. You get excited when we talk about it.
It's over. Hilarious. I even write it. Yeah.
Yeah, you just stick around.
Yeah. Due out summer of 23, we think.
Oh, fantastic.
Hopefully sooner, but we're
Might be sooner.
Busy with jobs.
Sure. I had seen a question earlier in the chat. Obviously the first novel was originally a screenplay. Is there any chance that it ever becomes a movie?
Yeah, I think there is probably a chance. I mean, that's my background. Obviously, I was out there forever, and that was the original idea. And I've had some interest from the people that, I know that are still in that world. But, I've talked about this before, but the reality is it's like a lot of people want to make movies out of books, and very few of them actually have the cash, which is sort of like all that matters. So we're both like obviously incredibly open-minded, and it was, originally it was a script that I wanted to direct with my brother Scott, who was my business partner and creative partner at the time. So I mean, if that opportunity came along, I'd be all over it. But I will say that the writing, being a novelist sounds so pretentious to say out loud, but whatever, I don't know how else to put it. Being a writer is writing books, and then the audio book as well, is so fun and so satisfying and so easy. I mean, not easy, it's difficult, but it's not as hard as trying to raise like $2 million and shoot a movie on Mackinac Island. Like, that's just ridiculous. So if something like it happened, it would be awesome. We'd be all over it, but it's not, I'm interested in writing more books. I think it's a really interesting world. And again, I think the audio, you'll see if you purchase the audio book, that there's so much you can do now with sounds and music. And, I'm getting my kicks from self-publishing for now.
Yeah.
But it would be an awesome movie, obviously, I think. Especially, it could be a regional movie. Like, this concept, the world is changing, I think, too, with like creative and just in general, the way, because of the internet, there's just regional, you can write books that are really for a state, which is what we did. Sure. And actually for the north part of the state, pretty specific. And I think eventually you're going to get to the point where people are making films that are just for certain areas, just because it will appeal to that, rather than to try to be everything to everybody. So I think there's definitely opportunities that are going to come our way, but we want to focus on writing the next book because it's hilarious.
Well, I think I see lots of people smiling as you were describing it. So I think
talk about overselling something. Oh my God.
We're all ready. We're ready for 2023.
To that description now, I want to see it.
This question is for you, Dave. One of our readers, Barbara, was curious about how you ended up in the Philippines.
Well, I did it for love. My wife was born and raised in Cebu. We met in Los Angeles, but we lived in LA for a while and had a baby who's now 14 years old and is like 3 rooms over. But her name's Marty, and Marty very much wanted to be a doctor and had started med school before we had met, and obviously had to stop, and because for obvious reasons. And she got accepted into one of the best med schools in the Philippines, and it's obviously much cheaper. So she and Kelly moved back here for her to go to med school. And I was still in Los Angeles working at the time. And I did that for like almost a year, working as a creative director at an agency. And then I was like, this sucks. And so moved here, met some really talented motion graphic designers, editors, and basically was able, this is the early days of decent internet, so it was not easy, but basically started a production company here in Cebu and just, fell in love with the lifestyle here. And just have not had the plan was not to stay here forever. That was like 12 years ago. We're like, it's a nice life, it's beautiful. It's a little crazy. It's a little chaotic. It's definitely a developing country, but I feel very much at home here, and I'm able to have a good life. So that's really how it happened.
Okay. And how amazing that the two of you are still, able to create this amazing book on different sides of the planet. That's pretty cool.
Completely insane.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're running short on time. Is there anything that you want to say to readers before I throw it over to my colleague Josiah to bring us home?
I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for your support. And we love Michigan very, very much. It's our home state, and there's more to come. And this thing wouldn't be as great as it is without you guys. So God bless everyone, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. We talked about it early in the beginning, the feeling that we have, but there's just no more like personal and emotional experience I've ever had than the act of putting this thing out. Well, maybe I would have to say getting married and things like that, but as far as like creatively and professionally, to reconnect with the state that I love, and what a way to do it. And to be able to get back, and we're going to come back this summer too and sign some more books in July. If anybody wants to come up and get a book signed, we'll be there. We're going to do a reading from Somewhere in Crime, and we're going to probably stay out late.
Yeah, we will.
So anybody, feel free to join. But yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks for reading the book and for caring a lot about our stories, and we'll try and keep them coming.
I'd like to add real quick, the Island Bookstore, the Mackinac Island Bookstore, they carry the book, and they always post the signings and events. So the Island Bookstore in Mackinac, they'll have information for anybody who wants to.
Exclusive retailer at this point, because we're too stupid to figure out how to get it in other books.
Very
other bookstores. We're like, you know what? If it's only going to be in one bookstore, that's pretty cool. And I mean, that kind of fits with the theme of the whole thing. You're like, so.
Thank you.
True. Thank you both so much, Josiah.
All right, guys. I want to thank you so much for coming. I want to thank, Dave, Jim, and our bridge staff, Amber and Kathryn. And I want to thank our participants the most. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day during your lunchtime to just talk about this wonderful book with us. I want to remind you that we will be posting this recording about this week, so be on the lookout for that in our news feed. And I want to announce that we will be resuming book club June 8th. So in about 2 months, June 8th. The book club announcement will be coming soon, so be on the lookout for that in your newsletters, emails, or in our news feed. I want to remind you that if you're a member of Bridge Michigan, you get the book for free. So become a member. Thanks
Wait
again.
a minute.
So yeah,
I don't remember volunteering that. Disgusting.
Free to readers, but not
okay. All right. That's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, so getting on these good benefits. I want to thank everybody for showing up, being a good sport. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.